Hey everyone, it's White Cross again. This video will be kind of an intermediate video discussing sterling silver as it relates to precious metals holdings. This is part two of this series, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into what is sterling silver, some of the pitfalls, the pluses and minuses, a little bit more into the history of the availability of sterling silver, at least in the United States of America. So, to redefine sterling silver, if you watch the first video, you know that sterling silver is a silver standard. Sterling silver is 92.5% pure silver, as opposed to the 90% circulating coins that we had in the United States from the late 1700s up and through 1964. So we had a 90% silver standard. Countries like England and the UK had a 92.5% pure silver standard, and that's what sterling is, 92.5% pure. Once again, it's an alloy. So sterling silver is typically an alloyed, that contains pure silver, 92.5%, and 7.5% copper. Sometimes alloyed with other metals, but typically you'll find it alloyed with copper. Why did they do that? Sterling silver, like 90% silver, is a little bit more durable. Pure silver is relatively soft. Fine details can get worn away very quickly. 90% silver and 92.5% sterling silver, a little bit more durable. They'll make your items last a little bit longer. So, the first video, we talked a little bit about some of the silver vehicles that were available to Americans in the late 1970s. And one of my favorites, again, were these Mexican onzas. And the nice thing about these, again, is that they are 1 ounce of troy ounce of pure silver in the form of a larger than 1 troy ounce sterling silver coin. So Mexico being way ahead of the game when it comes to precious metals and what the market was reacting to at the time, they released these at a time right after 90% was popular, shifted into 92.5% pure silver, and then as I recapped for the last video, they were very quick on the draw to come into 999 pure silver. But this video, again, a deeper dive into sterling silver. The sterling silver is typically used in coins, but also in what we call objects of virtue or just artistic objects, things like this candlestick, things like this necklace. And I wanted to touch kind of briefly on some of the pluses and minuses of sterling silver if you decide that you want to have some of these types of objects in your sterling or your silver holdings. Nothing wrong with sterling silver coins if you can find them. I am a big fan of this particular style of coin. It's a really easy thing to add to your stack, and as it's 1 troy ounce of pure silver, it's just as easy to calculate the value, the worth of a sterling silver 1 troy ounce coin as it is to calculate the value of a 999 pure silver coin. So I'm a fan of those, but there are some pitfalls associated with some of the items that are also made out of sterling silver. This silver candlestick is a great example. This is a modern piece, probably made in the 1960s by an American manufacturer. It's a little bit tarnished now, I apologize for that, but it's easy for somebody who's not used to sterling silver to see the silver mark on the bottom of this, and if it's priced at $10 or $15, think they're getting a great deal. It's very important to note when you're talking about objects like this that are kind of puffy, that have a sealed bottom to them where you can't see inside, that thick item is typically not made out of pure sterling silver. This has a jeweler's plaster or resin, sometimes called cement, on the inside. It's a very thick, weighted piece of form that a very thin shell of sterling silver is formed over. So the actual silver content in this, let's say this item weighs 10 troy ounces, there's probably less than 1 troy ounce of pure silver in this. It's easy to get fooled by that, and sellers typically aren't looking to try to trick you into thinking that it's solid silver, but just beware that it is not solid silver most of the time. The same thing is true of silverware. We touched on silverware a little bit in the last video, but I just wanted to give you some examples. This is a collector spoon made probably in the 1940s. A stamped piece of sterling silver silverware will almost always indicate on the back somewhere that it is in fact made out of sterling. Silver-plated objects became very popular, especially in England and even the United States in the late 1800s through the 1930s, 1940s. Silver plate sometimes has marks on it that look like English hallmarks. They are designed to kind of mimic those marks. But manufacturers were proud of making silver, sterling silver items, and the people that were buying sterling silver items kind of probably wanted to show them off to their friends and family. So these pieces are typically marked sterling. It's a good rule of thumb that if you pick up a piece of sterling at an antique mall or a swap meet, and it looks like silver, it smells like silver, it feels like silver, but it's not marked sterling or 925 on it somewhere, be careful, because those items may really look like silver, but most of the time sterling silver is marked and it will say sterling silver on it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every single piece of sterling silver is going to be marked, but in my experience, probably 39 times out of 40, if it's not marked sterling, then it isn't sterling. Just be aware of that. Two kind of pitfalls that you need to be aware of. The larger objects that feel puffy or that look puffy, that are kind of thicker, and sterling flatware, if it's not marked sterling, beware of it. Just be careful around it. That is particularly true. There's kind of a combination when you're talking about silverware knives in particular. Knives often have those kind of thick handles, not unlike the base of this candlestick. Those knife handles are also often filled with a resin or a cement. And the blades on silverware knives almost always made out of stainless steel. So if you're buying in weight, if you're buying by the piece, make sure that it's marked sterling when you're buying silverware, but also beware of those knives. Sometimes forks and spoons, but most of the time it's just those knives. If they have those thicker handles to them, often that is filled with something other than silver, and those blades are almost always going to be made out of stainless steel. If it's a thin item like this, where you can see just how thin that stamped piece of metal is, similar in thickness to a coin, and it's marked sterling, you're probably okay. Just again, some pitfalls to be careful of, to be aware of. I wanted to touch kind of on an interesting side topic, since we're taking a little bit of a deeper dive into sterling silver. There was a brief period of time where even people that were making bullion out of sterling silver, and I'm talking specifically about companies like the Franklin Mint. They were making artistic art bar type silver, often that had a theme like the holidays or family or sometimes patriotic, usually smaller, thicker bars that were weighed in grains, and often those bars were made out of sterling silver. So not quite the same size as the silver art bars of the same period of time. Those bars almost always indicate on them that they are made out of 999 pure silver. Some of those bars from the Franklin Mint, again, not all of them, but some of them are made out of sterling silver. They weren't trying to deceive anybody. Most of the time, they say very clearly on those items that they are made out of sterling silver, and I personally think a lot of those are actually very attractive. But just beware that if you're looking at those types of products, often they are sterling silver and not 999 pure silver. What does that mean on the plus side? Often sellers recognize that sterling silver is a little bit more difficult to get rid of, and the premiums on those can often be quite low, and sometimes there is no premium. They'll sell them to you for the price of silver. This is an example that's a little bit similar to that. This is kind of a scarce award that was given out to the Seagram's Company employees. This is dated 1987. The pieces I was talking about earlier, a little bit earlier than that, 1974, 1975. So this is a little bit of an unusual piece. It's quite heavy. This is a hefty piece, a chunky piece of sterling silver. But it actually says sterling down at the very bottom. I hope the glare is not too bad and you can read that. This is made by Tiffany & Company. And this is an unusual piece. I consider this to be a bullion piece, and it is part of my silver bullion collection, but it is only 925. I don't have a lot of sterling bullion pieces in my collection, but this is one of them. It's interesting enough, and if you look hard enough, you can find other examples of that on places like eBay. I mentioned in the first video, this is a Margot de Tasco necklace made out of sterling silver, 1950s probably, maybe up into the 1960s. This is an example of an item that was also made in Mexico. This is a piece by Salvador de la Serena. This is a ashtray, or I like to call it a cigar tray, although it's probably more of an ashtray, also made out of sterling silver. I wanted to do a quick rundown with using the Sigma. For those of you who saw the earlier videos that I did about the equipment that I use on a regular basis, know that I'm not necessarily a fan of telling people who are new to buying bullion, whether it's 90% or 999 pure silver. There are lots of other things that you probably should be focusing on before you focus on a Sigma. It's an expensive piece of equipment. I love the Sigma. I've been using it for quite a while, for several years, but it'll run you $1,000. But where it really does come in handy, and Sigmas have two wands that come with them, at least the standard version of the Sigma, and you can use these to test things that don't really fit on the platform there in the middle. We're going to go down to sterling, and this will help give kind of an idea of some of the pitfalls of sterling silver. Remember, I'm a fan of sterling silver. If you feel like you want to have some of this in your silver holdings, I think that's a good idea, as long as you're aware of some of the pitfalls and the disadvantages to it. So this is that Salvador de la Serena piece, and we're going to go ahead and test that. You can see right there, I'll scoot it forward just a little bit, that we're falling within those brackets. You moved around a little bit, and that gives you kind of a better idea. This is sterling silver. I have no doubt that it is. Serena is a well-known name. This is a mid-century modern piece, also dating from the 1950s. It's a good form, it's a good piece. But for a period of time, Mexico silver, especially pieces that were made by local Mexican silversmiths, seemed to kind of drift a little bit with their definition of what sterling silver was. Often pieces made in the 1970s and 1980s that said they were 92.5% pure sterling seemed to work out to be around 90% pure silver. It's not a condemnation. I think that there are beautiful pieces that come out of Mexico. Obviously, you've heard that I'm a huge fan of Mexican silver coins, but some of those makers probably figured that there was no reason to be really specific in particular when it came to the purity, as long as it was close. And I have found several pieces that are a little bit closer to 90% than 92.5. So Sigma comes in really handy when you've got pieces that you want to test. Let's try out that big chunking piece right there in the middle at 92.5. I have no doubt that Tiffany knew what 92.5 was, and they were very, very careful to make sure that this big piece that was an award from the Seagrams Corporation was in fact 92.5. This Margot de Tasco piece, a little bit older, and again, it's within the brackets, but it's a little bit off to the side. I'm not doubting the purity of it. It may have something to do with the size and shape and form of this particular necklace, but again, Sigma does come in handy when you've got those pieces that are a little bit unusual, especially if you're talking about sterling silver. It's a great time to practice using the Sigma, because this is really where it comes in handy. Another pitfall with sterling silver, sometimes the purity is a little bit off. Be aware of that. Nothing wrong with these pieces. There's nothing wrong with a piece if you really, really like it that is a little bit less than sterling silver. Just beware that exit strategy, again, when it comes time to sell it, you may have a harder time finding a buyer, which means it may take longer and you may get a smaller amount of money for it. If you like it and you understand those pitfalls, there's nothing wrong with that. So some things to be aware of as an intermediate sterling silver buyer. Sometimes from some locations, items indicated to be sterling silver may not be quite sterling silver. Sometimes when it comes to sterling silver silverware, those knives have filled handles and are not solid silver all the way through. The blades on those knives are often stainless steel and should not be included in that weight unless you know for certain that they are sterling, and you rarely see sterling silver knife blades. Bigger items like this candlestick often are filled with plaster as well. So don't buy these by the weight unless you are 100% sure that this item really is solid silver all the way through. Assume that it is a hollow item that has been filled with a jeweler's resin or a jeweler's plaster. That was a quick rundown on intermediate sterling silver buying for the person who wants to stack sterling silver. Again, as long as you're aware of the pitfalls or the potential pitfalls, and you take that in consideration when you're looking at your exit strategy as you're picking up these pieces, if they're important to you and you like them, as long as you're aware of those, then move forward with it. Just be aware of those pitfalls. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you have questions about sterling silver, I'd be happy to give it a shot to try to answer those questions. Leave a comment below. If you have a suggestion for another video that you'd like to see us make involving sterling or any other form of physical precious metals, please do that below, and we'll take a look at that and see if we can come up with some information for you. And as always, thank you for allowing us to be a part of your journey into physical precious metals holdings.